Shalom and welcome back to the Chazak X-Files. Here, Ruben Abragamov with the famous,
Hello,
glorious,
Shalom, Rabbi Hedge.
beautiful Rabbi Lawrence Hedjoff.
Let me just
All
share
right.
this as 1 second.
Go for it. Share it. Today's conversation is going to be about carnivores versus herbivores, the Jewish view of diet and food. This conversation is a continuation of the conversations we've had over the last few weeks, trying to find different Jewish topics that we can just discuss, have fun with, and hopefully try to give you, the audience, some pieces, some nuggets of wisdom and some insight into the Jewish view of all things food this week. So, Rabbi Hedjoff, are you personally a herbivore or a carnivore? Or both?
I am most certainly a 1 second here. While I create my post, and my computer is slow, so forget that. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, we're back. Yeah, I am a carnivore. I eat meat. I don't think of a time in my life when I didn't eat some meat of some kind, except grilled beef liver. I don't know why. The smell of that stuff, I can't eat it. Just the smell of it. Chicken liver, yeah, not bad. But besides that, yes, I'm a 100% carnivore.
Were you always a carnivore?
Yeah. I can't think of a time when I was ever not one, actually. I mean, I have friends who are vegetarians. I have friends and family who are vegans. My brother went through a long period when he was a vegan, and he is very into fitness and health, and he found himself just as strong as a vegan than he was eating meat. He did stop, but he was, and he actually enjoyed the experience a lot. It was actually pretty recent, and he tracked it and traced it and spoke about it and blogged about it. But myself, no.
It's interesting. For me, growing up, I've always preferred dairy over meat. And even till this day, when I'm eating meat, I have a hard time with bones. If I see bones, I get
really. Okay, if you have a choice at a milky restaurant or a fleishy restaurant, you go for milk.
No, not as a growing up. I always preferred dairy over meat. I'd rather a slice of pizza than a burger. You know, that was my always go-to food. Dairy was always my go-to food. Although now, as an adult, I prefer beef.
I thought you were going to say, as an adult, I'm lactose intolerant. I thought you were going to say that.
I'm definitely not lactose intolerant. I could easily sit down and eat a pie pizza any day, any time. But it's not about the meat. It's interesting. It's, for me, it was always a sensitivity about the food. Like, if I'm gonna get a piece of meat, I don't want a bone on it. If chicken, I prefer white meat, which is like unusual, because most people like the dark meat, which is like softer. I can't eat wings. I can't do that stuff. Till this day, it's something about it grosses me out. I can't explain it. Just a certain type of an aversion I've always had to bones and meat. I don't know what it is. I like meat, but eating off a bone somehow just turns me off a little bit.
It's too close to the source. You want it sterilized.
Correct. Although I do appreciate beef. I love eating meat. I won't eat veal because I believe that it's the process in which you create a veal today is complicated. And so I won't eat that, but
we'll talk about a little cruelty to animals. Let's
get into the conversation. Sorry about that. So where do you want to begin?
Let's go back to the beginning, because there's no doubt about it. Eating food is, once again, in Gan Eden, right? In the Garden of Eden, we know that Adam and Chava were offered, the first mitzvah given to them actually was to eat everything from every tree. They were offered a full selection of whatever they wanted to eat. One tree they were not permitted to eat. Obviously, that's the one they went for. So we see that the original sin involved food and eating. No coincidence, says Rav Tzadok HaKohen, that the idea of kosher somehow in some way is a tikkun, is a fix-up from that original eating.
Well, let's just clarify. They were not permitted to eat animals.
Not at all. Not
So
at
when God creates man and woman, he creates them in a form where their primary diet is vegetarian.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We know that until after the flood, after the Mabul, when Noah exited the ark, there was no eating animals. After the flood came, somehow the nature of the world, mankind, and maybe even animals changed, and we were permitted to have animals, which is why a seventh mitzvah was added to 6 existing ones, which are given to all of humanity, and actually named after Noah, although he didn't create them. They exist. 6 existed before Noah came along. And the 7th mitzvah that still applies to every non-Jew is Ever min hachai. You cannot eat the limb of a live animal. And that goes back to after they came out of the ark. So until that point, all of humanity was vegetarian.
Okay, great. So let's ask a different question. God's a perfect being. Okay, he creates a reality, which is this plane that we're on right now. Do you mind turning that off? And he creates human beings with this need to shove fuel consumption down their face. And the question is why? Why not just create man with, the ability of just, solar power? That's it. You just stand in the sun every day for like 20 minutes. You flip around each side, and that's it. You're good. You're full. Just like plants. They don't need to eat anything. You just between the oxygen and the sun rays, you're good. What is the Kabbalah, so to speak, of the necessity of having people chew, chomp, eat the food around them?
There's many ways to answer that question. I'm going to just give one idea, which, fun enough, I just thought about recently and read something on. Maybe that's why I thought about it. Adam, the Lashon for man, is same as Adamah, from the earth.
Right.
And everything comes out of the earth, including mankind. We come from the Adamah, and we are supported by it, right? All the food we have, animals eat the grass, right? It comes out of the ground. If they didn't have anything to eat, we wouldn't eat, right? Eggs and chicken, right? And cheese and milk and wine, everything comes out of the ground. So we are part of the ground, right? Our physicality is part of Adamah, Adam and Adamah. There's an element that we are a base, earth-bound and earth-needing creature. That is where we come from. And that's where we go to as well in the end. However, there's another aspect to this, and that is the neshama, that's the soul. And the soul, in order to stay inside the body, this is the fascinating part. You can go without a lot of physical pleasures in this world, but you must eat or you die. So the thing that pulls body and soul together and keeps them connected is food and water. And without that, the body and soul separate. So this is the glue that is keeping the soul connected to the Adam and the Adamah, to the earth as well.
Interesting. So eating itself somehow elevates the soul.
It is connected. It is connected. I mean, that leads us to another question, which must be connected as well. And that is, so kosher must be soul-based, which we know it is. So there's 2 topics here, and we shouldn't really confuse them, although maybe they overlap a little bit. According to some people, they do. But we have healthy eating and the mitzvah to eat foods that keep our bodies healthy, which is one discussion, which we can discuss. There's a lot on that. And then there's another discussion of the mitzvah to not eat non-kosher foods, which is another topic, which should not be confused with the first topic, because it is its own topic. And that is a chok, that is a statute. We do not know the reason, but for that particular idea of keeping kosher. However, the Kabbalists do hint at certain things in order to give us some insight. But there are klal, in the general format, kosher is considered to be a chok, says Rashi, a statute. We don't know the reason for it. Now, health reasons we do. The Rambam tells us in the Mishnah Torah that eating healthy is a necessity. He actually says you cannot connect to God by eating unhealthy foods. Now, you may have kosher foods that are extremely unhealthy, right? And you may have non-kosher foods that are very healthy. So the two don't have to necessarily become enmeshed, but we're expected to do both. Eat healthy foods that are kosher. And healthy means that which sustains us and keeps us physically able to serve Hashem. He actually says it's impossible to serve Hashem when you're eating unhealthy foods and you're not healthy. It's connected. That is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God created us, to take foods, put them into our bodies to maintain a healthy equilibrium between body and soul. Boom, together. That's what we're trying to get at.
Interesting. So I understand the body part and how, eating a healthy diet, leads to having a healthier body. But maybe we could help understand and explain, well, what does it mean to have a healthy soul? What does that mean that a diet impacts the soul? So that means you're saying that if I eat like, pork chops, that I'm destroying my soul?
So you can never destroy a soul. It's always there.
Well, I have a sick soul. I have a sick soul. It's unhealthy. Excuse me. It's unhealthy. Therefore, it's sick, right?
The Ramban talks about
I'm polluting myself.
The Nachmanides, not the Rambam, not Maimonides. The Ramban gives us a little Kabbalistic insight into this idea. Well, Torah tells us the reason we keep kosher is kadoshim to you. You have to be kadosh, you have to be holy. So we know there's something in holy is a soul-based thing for sure. He says that if you notice the foods that are not kosher, right, which are fish without fins and scales, and animals that don't chew the cud and have split hoof. So lions and tigers not kosher. Cow, goat, kosher. Right? Horse, not kosher. Camel, not kosher. Giraffe, kosher. Right? And sharks and eels, not kosher. And it carries on like this, as you know. And insects, he says they have something in common. Most of them, he says, are cruel creatures. And by eating their flesh, somehow it's going to enter your body and your spirit. And is metamtem et halev. It blocks your heart. Now, that is not a cholesterol statement. Blocks your metamtem et halev. Not metamtem, metumtam. It blocks you. It closes you, says Rashi, to spiritual experiences. It removes your seichel. Somehow eating these foods from non-kosher animals that are predators, because generally speaking, we eat the prey, not the predator. Eating the foods of these animals for us, the Jewish people, who are meant to be Rahmanim, merciful beings, somehow eating these foods is going to influence our neshamot in a negative way.
So are vegetarians more spiritual because there's less impurities in the food that they're eating? Even if you're eating kosher, let's say, you're trying to keep kosher. A few years ago, I was visiting Muncie, and I was at a hall, and I was at a wedding. It was the best chicken I ever had, and I found out a couple of days later that it wasn't kosher. Right, I had all intention of trying to keep kosher, and so you're saying there.
Well, that's honest. Well, I had a Rebbe who used to say to me, I said, let's say you eat non-kosher by mistake. He'd be like, let's say you drink poison by mistake. A little unfair to say that, because the people who did that, the people who did that, who had that, they are on sim, and that's it. That wasn't their fault.
Well, that's true. But the point that I'm making is that if according to that logic, it makes sense to be a vegetarian. Because
vegetarian, by the way, doesn't mean you're eating kosher. First of all, we know that there are many insects and bugs, but which, by the way, eating a bug is worse than eating a pig. We know that in halacha. They're eating a flying creature, right, like a bug, which also crawls on the ground. The Gemara Makot tells us is worse than eating a bit of pig. I know pigs get a really bad rap.
How are you going to explain that? You're saying that I could eat a lion, right, which is nature is to be carnivorous, and that it's worse for me to eat a fly?
Yeah. Well, in terms of isurim, you get more averot by eating a fly. Now that means on the surface you have to check your vegetables as well, right? Because there could be a fly inside there, there could be a bug inside there, and you're obligated to check your vegetables. So just because you're vegetarian doesn't mean you're keeping kosher. I just want to make that very important point.
What you're really saying is that you got to become a pescatarian, because fish does not eat. What?
No, you got to stay Jewish.
Fish does not need a what's it called? The grill hashgacha.
Check
it.
Well, there are
cows are good.
Right. That is true. That is true. If a person was just able to live on fish their entire lives and no other, but people eat vegetables. You know what I'm saying? It's part of any diet. It has to be checked, and you have to make sure that no bugs are present. But the Rambam was saying something very, very important, and almost seminal. On the other Kabbalists agree, and they said non-kosher food somehow, we're not sure how, it's impacting the neshama. The neshama has to remain pure and open, and eating those foods, I mean, it's such a, for us, not so crazy. We know that foods can affect a person's personality and their psyche, and everyone talks about gut health now. I think a lot of depression is coming from a bad gut, bacteria in the gut. I'm not connecting that to kosher in any way. What I am saying is the idea that food can impact a person's personality is now accepted on a soul level, whatever that means. This is what the Ramban is saying. Eating non-kosher food is going to affect a person's neshama and close them off to certain attributes and certain midot, certain character traits. That's what he says. But again, that's Al Pi Kabbalah. There's a famous story. Again, I don't know if it's true, maybe apocryphal, of the Rambam, who was not a Kabbalist, who used to give advice to the Jews of Yemen. And they wrote and said, a lot of our kids are becoming irreligious. And this community was religious for many, 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 many years. And he wrote back, supposedly, they say, I don't know if it's true, and said, check the shochet's knife. Check the knife of the shochet. You know, a shochet has a knife that is it's razor sharp.
Right.
No nicks, and they drag their nail over it to make sure there's no nicks or cuts or catches in it. And they checked it, and they saw there was nicks, and it was not a kosher knife, which rendered the animal not kosher in its slaughter. That means kids were eating non-kosher meat, which means that somehow it affected them in some negative spiritual way. So what happened? They fixed the situation, and the kids came back. That is the famous story of the Rambam. Whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but the concept could well be true. We know that eating non-kosher food affects a person's personality, right? And the connection to our Baruch Hu.
Okay, so let me ask you a different kind of question over here, just so that maybe people are thinking it a little bit. You know, ultimately, everyone here wants to be healthy, right?
Yeah.
Does the Torah itself give you a specific kind of diet to consume that is healthier than the other? Like, are we eating too much meat? Are we not eating enough vegetables? Should we be having more fish? You know,
the Torah does not, but the Rambam does. The Rambam gives us in the Mishnah Torah a list. He said a number of interesting things. He says you should not eat animals that are force-fed, which remind me of this veal thing, you know, and a lot of this. You should not have flour that is totally, all of the bran is taken out of it, right, and whitened. The Rambam 1,000 years ago. He also said you shouldn't soup. He says wine is very, very good for you. He says you should have lighter meat than heavier meat. But and most important thing he says, which he calls a samavet, a poison, a dangerous poison, is to overeat. He says you can get away with eating fried foods, he says, as long as you have a little bit. He says the main problem is overeating. And today we're seeing this. People literally, in our society where food is so prevalent, that people overeat, and it's become heart disease is the biggest killer, right? So overeating, he says, is the worst thing you can do. So you can get away with eating unhealthy foods in the Mishnah Torah as long as you have a little bit. And I think this is one of the big challenges today. So nowhere does he say you should not eat meat. Nowhere does he say that. He says you should not overeat. And eat light foods first. You have to sleep 8 hours a day, right? You should use the bathroom regularly. That's a sign of health, he says. You should drink, obviously, wine and water. That was basically what they used to do. However, he assumes that people are eating meat. And people did for a long time. So let's talk about meat itself for a second. So what are your views on Jews eating meat? How do you...
Listen, yeah, I mean, like there's been so many diets over the last decade about food, you know, with Atkins and and more recently like paleo and carnivore and ketosis, and getting onto a ketogenic diet. And it's so hard to know what the right diet is. And everyone claims that their diet's the diet, but ultimately I really believe in balance. That you need to have the basic 5 food groups in your diet. You have to eat everything, a little bit of everything. And I think that the Rambam is, from a medical perspective, he knows best that you need to have a nice diverse diet. There's no question though for me, like a wheat, when I eat like mezonot or hamotzi, it just doesn't fill me. Like I could have bread, like I could have a loaf of bread, it doesn't do anything. Pastas, that stuff doesn't do anything for me. I find myself feeling satiated the most when I am eating a protein. There's no protein there; it's NG, it's no good. But I think and therefore for me, I'm a very big believer in eating what you can to make sure that you eat as little as possible. And the less you use your mouth in terms of chewing, the better it is. And for what I find is that meat or salads with oils, proteins and oils are the only thing that kind of like really hold you down. When I was doing a ketogenic diet, I couldn't eat more than 2 meals.
Wow.
And they weren't very large meals because there was so much fat content in those meals, because with the healthy oils and the nuts and whatever it is, like you just couldn't eat. And so much of our diet is based on wheat today, which is called dwarf wheat. We don't even have real wheat.
My book some years ago, Ellie, that this is really the wheat you have nowadays is rolling fields, is beautiful lush wheat, is not the reality anymore.
Right. I say in the 1950s, the U.S. government created something called dwarf wheat, which is a hybrid of weed that grows very quickly and needs very little water, and wheat. And we took a stalk of wheat, which on a genetic level had 18 chromosomes.
Yeah.
To dwarf wheat today, which is 48 chromosomes. And I believe that is why today you have so many issues with people in their stomachs and celiac and all these other dietary issues.
I gave up 2 years ago, pretty much, except on Shabbat. I have a bite of it. We have spelt in my house. Spelt they've not affected so much.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't genetically modify spelt yet in the same way.
Yeah, right. We have spelt challah, which is now very available. Just this Shabbat, we had I was at a friend's house for Shabbat, his son's bar mitzvah. He had 6 different types of these kind of breads they have different types and mixtures. And my wife brought the spelt bread, and it does not affect us as much. The yeast inside there is not as stretchy. I think it's different. It's not having the same effect as it does. And the Torah speaks about it, right? Kusmin is referred to as being a very good form. So it's unaffected, but I don't eat that stuff at all during the week. I gave up all cookies, all pasta. I just know myself. I don't know what it is. Maybe me somewhere else be different. It changed my entire relationship to food in general. And because of that, I did increase my protein intake. You can't help it because you got to eat something. And my fat intake, not through grains. Again, the Rambam was talking 1,000 years ago, but there are still principles that stand. He was of the opinion that overeating is a problem. I think a lot of these foods are designed to make you keep eating. That's one of the problems.
There's actually this idea that there's a guy named David, I'm blanking on his name. He's part of the Human Longevity Project. He's a professor at Harvard University who believes that if you add this vitamin called niacin, which is basically like a form of vitamin B, vitamin B into your diet, that you have the power of creating healthier cells and living longer. Now, what he says is that, of course you need to have the supplement, but he says what really ages cells is consumption. And therefore, the more food that you consume, the more your cells break down. And therefore, he says that you talk about, oxidation and glycomation as being the 2 major causes of cellular death.
That's what antioxidant is, anti the oxygen that's killing you. That's the idea, right?
Right. So it's finding that balance, and it is hard to kind of know how much is too much or how little is too little, because you have today we have lots of different kinds of eating disorders. Aside from obesity, you have anorexia and other types of eating disorders that are rampant everywhere.
Gut health, I tell you, I think we're just starting the research now, is going to become the next big understanding when they start to figure it out of a lot of diseases. There's cancers as well. I mean, we've all heard stories of people who were able to put their cancers into remission. I'm not saying this is instead of medication, but put their cancer into remission by healthy eating.
Right. Listen, I want my son to
diets and the like.
He could eat whatever he wants, and he never gains a pound of weight. Like, I mean, like they said that if you take they found that if you take the bacteria in a teen who has a very fast metabolism, and you ingest it, there's a way of ingesting it, that you could actually change your own bacterial health, and it starts acting in ways that you could have never imagined, and it does break down the food much faster, and you're healthier, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, fantastic. I hear.
Yeah,
I hear them too. So let's go back to the Jewish side. So in Judaism, the Rambam is the one we go to for the general ideas.
Yeah.
And he was the one who laid out really like an eating plan. He put it in the same book that he put the laws of Shabbat, laws of Yom Kippur, Tzedakah. And so he said, oh, let me talk about healthy eating. He wrote a lot more, but he actually included that into the Mishnah Torah, which I find unbelievable. My rabbi used to call it the least studied chapter of the Rambam.
Mm-hmm.
The healthy eating chapter.
Healthy eating chapter.
Extraordinary.
So does
it's a very holistic approach as well. It's eating, it's sleeping, it's exercise. Exercise, he says, it's very important. It is a mitzvah to exercise as well.
So food is tied into our both physical and spiritual health.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're talking about the exercise and so on and so forth. But is there anything wrong if I choose to live in one extreme, Jewishly? Meaning, am I doing anything wrong if I decide to no longer eat meat? Am I doing anything wrong if I decide I'm only eating meat?
That's our topic today. So I'll tell you my opinion.
Meaning, like you just started that. Like the segue was, hey, guys, these laws are in Maimonides' book of halakha, right? And therefore, he speaks about having this biodiverse diet. And I'm saying, well, let's ask the question. Well, according to Maimonides, what would he say to someone who says, yeah, I'm giving up meat or I'm giving up everything else?
There seems to be no reason not to. If a person wants a vegetarian today, there's no reason they can fulfill all the mitzvot in the Torah. Now, having said that, there are certain mitzvot which we know are performed better, definitely in the past, but even today by you eating meat. Mm-hmm. For example, we know keeping Shabbat. There's Oneg Shabbat, which means to find pleasure in aspects of Shabbat. One of them is you should eat meat. Okay, and they say the Arizal used to be a vegetarian all week, for different reasons, actually, for different reasons. On a Shabbat, he would eat meat because he felt only on Shabbat he was able to lift up the souls of the humans that reincarnated into animals, and he could lift up and perfect their neshamot. That's the Arizal. But could a person theoretically keep Shabbat by not eating meat? 1,000%. Now, when it comes to the Korban Pesach from the past, and the Korbanot in general, they were meat eaters. They were eating meat, and it was part of the mitzvah. So that's a better question. When the third and final temple is rebuilt, and Korbanot are introduced into our people, are we going to have problems with vegetarians? That's a good question. That's a good question, and I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. But meat eating, I know people say, well, it comes back, there'll be meat. There will be meat eating at that time. There will be meat eating at that time. I don't doubt it. I think our relationship to food, though, is going to change drastically. Mm-hmm. It's going to change drastically. We're going to appreciate food in a very, very different way.
When the Jews were in the desert for the 40 years, right? The Torah tells us that they ate this thing called man, right? Now, well, if eating food is so important, right, then why would God create a different kind of diet for the Jews of the desert?
Well, first of all, it doesn't say they didn't eat meat as well.
Well, yeah, it does say that, because later on, they complained to Moses that they didn't have meat. They wanted basar. And therefore, the implications...
That maybe they didn't have the meat they had originally. We know that they were given the slav. There was a certain quail that came down to them.
But that was only
and they died for that particular complaining. it could have been that we're referring to the meat they had back in Mitzrayim, but I don't think there was any problem with them after that slaughtering an animal and eating it.
But wouldn't that be gluttony at that point? Because the man gave you everything that you wanted it to be. You were completely safe.
Right. The Gemara tells us that it tasted of whatever you want it to be, but the Torah tells us it tasted of a wafer dipped in honey. There's no doubt about it. But they were permitted to eat meat. I don't think it was asur, as far as I know. I don't.
No, I wouldn't say it was prohibited. I would just say that the bottom line, the question is like this: why does God create a diet for the Jewish people that's so radically different than the typical diet that they would?
Well, the man, no, second. Are you talking about kosher or the man now?
Man, not kosher.
The man was a gift from Hashem to show that he was providing support for the Jewish people. They had a 40-year miracle that man came down. Hashem was like, I'm going to take care of you. You're not going to eat anything else. And here is your food. Here is your food. And the lesson, actually it's called the test of the man, because you couldn't put it over from one day to the next day, except on Friday, you got a double portion lechem mishnah. That you put your trust in Hashem, that every day the man would come and fall down and you would get to eat it. So we subsided on that for a long time. That Hashem is always there and always feeding us, always taking care of us. So that was a lesson that came from the man. There are those that say that the desire for meat, I believe it's a kliyakar. I remember reading it a while ago. He says is you should only eat meat if you feel a need and a lust for it. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't. That's how he understands it, if I'm not mistaken.
There's also this idea in the Gemara that depending on your financial, your net worth, that would also determine the kind of food that you would eat. That someone who is wealthier should have more meat versus someone who has less money should eat less meat.
Ironically, it's backwards now, right?
Right.
I mean, fish, salmon, as far as I know, is more expensive than a piece of chicken nowadays, right? For some reason, it's all gone hafuch, you know? Sometimes the cheapest foods are like burgers, right? And hot dogs you pick up from somewhere. And a healthy meal of salad you want to buy is going to cost you a lot more. I mean, we are definitely not helping ourselves when it comes to keeping our nation healthy. And I mean the American nation for sure. There's no doubt about it. There is a mitzvah, as we said, to take care of your body, right? And food is going to be an integral part of that. And if that involves you eating meat in order to do that, there is no problem. If you want to give up meat, nowadays there is no problem to do that, but it's not an obligation. There is no obligation to give up eating meat. And anyone comes to you and says that is the ideal of Judaism, they're wrong. They're wrong. They just are. And even Rav Kook is right, as far as I remember reading, didn't like the idea of vegetarians pushing this forward as a mantra, right? As a way of life. He didn't like that. If a person makes a decision want to give up meat, that is totally up to them. But he didn't like it.
Do you know why he didn't like it? So he says that the idea of becoming a vegetarian is a beautiful idea, but if you become a vegetarian, it means that you basically are so concerned about the animals on planet Earth that you stop taking care of humanity. Right. He says, therefore, that when and you see this, we have these animal rights activist groups that are that are more concerned about the rights of animals than they are of humans.
Right. They'll blow up some of these fanatical ones. Will blow up animals, kill people and not worry about the animals.
He says that it's a false sense of morality that happens when you become a vegetarian, because it basically it creates this fictitious belief that you've already cared for humanity, and that therefore he says this is why he says by Mashiach, when Mashiach comes, which is the tikkun for our caring for humanity, and in that world we can become vegetarian, right? But until then, he says you should not be a vegetarian.
Yeah, he wasn't in favor of that. I know everyone sells it that way, but he wasn't. again, when Mashiach comes, we'll see. He's a dat yachid. Most people do not agree with that, and they believe that meat eating will continue even after Mashiach comes into Olam Haba. But there's going to be some kind of change. We know that. We know that.
So okay, so how do we close this conversation?
I mean, we've only started the conversation. We're talking about kosher as part of this, right? Which means a little bit. Healthy foods is optimal. The Ramban says that being kadosh, holy, is directly related to not being a naval b'reshut HaTorah, says Nachmanides, the Ramban. That means a person can be a disgusting individual with the permission of the Torah. What does that mean? So he says a person has to moderate every physical pleasure in this world. Okay? Too much of anything is not good. So too much meat and too much burgers and too much pizza. You can have a kosher meal 1,000%. But if you're not following moderation, he says, the Ramban Nachmanides, you're actually foregoing a mitzvah in the Torah, which is Kedoshim Tiyu. And these people do not list that as one of the 630 mitzvah, but the Ramban does. There is a mitzvah to separate yourself from that which is mutar, permitted, to moderate your eating, moderate the physical pleasures of life. So we know that Kedusha, holiness, comes through moderating, and eating is one of them. Eating is one of them. So according to them, overeating meat would be a problem. Now, how much is overeating meat? I don't know. It depends where you are, who you ask, what you're after in life. Right? For some people, again, it used to be people used to eat meat once a week if they were lucky. Now you can go and have a steak every single night.
Actually, I just found this very interesting feature that if I set this up like this on the right-hand side, if people who are watching this right now on Facebook, you could type in your messages and we'll see them on the screen up here right now. And therefore we could actually address them as we're coming in. So Yosef Herman said, I'm not sure at what point in the conversation, because I don't see all the chats. He says that's why you should have meat. You should have more food that contains. You should eat food that contains more high fiber, I guess, for your gut stuff. That was probably the part.
Back then we were discussing gut health. Which, again, I think the studies in this are almost in their infancy. Are going to become the next conversation, next generation. I mean, another thing we didn't pick up on is this new genetically created meat that's becoming very, very spoken about. Bill Gates has been speaking about it recently. I mean, that could be another conversation of itself.
Yeah, well, that's definitely another conversation.
I would like to, excuse the pun, get my teeth into.
If anyone's watching and you're on Facebook and you're listening, if you want to ask us a question, you want us to review anything that we spoke of up until now, now's your chance to kind of like type it in.
Just put into the comment section over there.
Yeah, put into that comment section over there. Let's see how that works. I think that this food is there's no question. I don't think there's ever been a generation that's been so obsessed with food. I mean, you have people taking photos of their food, obsessing about the way their food looks. It's called food pornography, where they have like these photos of their food and it's just up there and it's beautiful and it's
I have students in my class at Yeshiva University, these two young girls who started a Instagram channel of just people cutting food and ripping part with their hands, and they had thousands and thousands of followers, so much so that big companies would pay them $1,000 just to post a picture of their. And these kids are making more money than me, sitting in my audience in school at undergraduate level. Unbelievable. So this vision of food, and food, by the way, in terms of viewership on social media, is way above everybody else. Way above everything else. On social media, they see the amount of videos that are watched from the beginning to the end. Food stuff is the greatest.
I won't be surprised if this video gets more traction than the other ones because of the food in the background. Maybe this is the trick. Maybe we just have food background, different kinds of dishes in the background, and we'll see how that impacts the viewership over here.
I think they're interested in the making of food. not the photographs of it. That's the.
All right. So thank you very much for listening tonight. If you have any questions at any point, you could email me at ruvain@wearechazak.com. I'll forward them to Rabbi Hadjoff as well. God willing, we were going to continue this conversation next week. Do you want to do kosher next week and just like double click on it, on what we did tonight and just expand it?
See what's on the news. We're going to come back to this topic again. There's more to discuss, a lot more. We just touched upon it, but I think we'll do something. Maybe we'll find something else that's in the news for next week.
Wait 1 second. We just got a question from Esther Levy. She says the foods today are not the same as 100 years ago. GMO and organic is the choices of today. This is true. They are the choices of today, but it's very expensive, and most people can't afford to live in a organic world where all they're doing is eating organic food. And what happens when you're out there and you can't find organic food? You're traveling and you need something right now. Like I was traveling this week, I was flying around, I was at the airports, and I didn't have time to pick up food. It was hard not to pick up a candy bar or something else along the way.
Well, traveling and eating is very difficult. You're out, you're tired, you're not in your regular schedule, so that's a real problem. That is a real problem. But you're absolutely right. Organic, though, is very problem. I mean, we have some organic foods in the house. Some things better than they're organic. Something I don't think is even worth being organic. It's just too pricey. It doesn't really add so much. But yeah, this is definitely one of the challenges of foods we have today. Well, like we did, they put the question on the screen. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, it's very fancy. Are there any other questions or comments that people want to make right now? Now's your chance to post it up there. We want to try to wrap up this conversation in the next couple of minutes. Okay, cool. This is very exciting, actually, because this allows this conversation to become much more interactive. I didn't know this existed before. So I have like a little panel. We're using a program called Restream, and we've been, we're just learning how to use this system over here. And actually, it plugs into, here we go. We've got a question here from Alvin Adler. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. It would seem that in the original plan of the Garden of Eden, we were not supposed to eat meat. What do you think of that? So we touched upon that. Yeah. Mankind, from the time of Adam Rishon, we were not meant to eat meat. There's no doubt about it. And until the end of the Mabul, the end of the flood, when Noah and his family came out, then meat was permitted to them. Having said that, that's the world we live in since then. And since then, meat has been permitted. What changed is a good question. Different opinions. Some people say animals changed. Most will say that humanity changed. We changed in such a way that we were permitted to eat meat. And we see there are various mitzvot that are performed with meat consumption, right? So there's no doubt about it. Now, let's be very clear. We didn't touch upon the fact you're not allowed to harm animals, which is why one of the reasons we do shechita is because it's the most listen, you're still killing an animal. It's never going to look great, right? No matter who's doing it. But shechita is one of the most humane ways of killing an animal, and it is therefore permitted. Question is, do we go back to that? Some people say yes, we will go back to that. But right now, being a carnivore does not make you any holier in Judaism than being a herbivore. There's no doubt about it.
But just to double click on Alvin's question over there, remember that it was only until the post flood where God grants Noah the ability to eat meat. And the way the sages kind of justify it is say that the nature of the world had changed, that man had a greater thirst for blood. And as a way of placating, satiating that desire for blood from humans, we were given this power of eating meat. Now, historically, we look at different, societies around the world that were vegetarian. And they were weaker when it came to fighting against bacteria, virus, and so on and so forth. That the consumption of meat actually helped create a greater biodiversity for viruses, ironically. And therefore, when the conquistadors came down into South America, and they would just like kill everyone because of their diverse, viral protection, and which they did not have. They all died right away. And they say they attribute that to their diet, that if they were consuming cows, which they were not, they were vegetarians, they would have had a much stronger defense against these viruses and bacteria. So there was something to be said about the consumption of animals that actually gave us the strength to resist so much of these viruses and bacteria, because the animals would figure out a way of fighting against them. They would get the disease. And when we would consume it, we would get the antibody, so to speak, through that consumption, which is actually proof that so much of what the animal is imparted to the to humans. Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom, everyone. Have a lovely night. We'll see you, Bezrat Hashem, next week. Oh, wait.
Ate from the tree. He was not supposed to. I mean, that's why they say that kosher is actually a tikkun for that original thing. So the tikkun, the fix-up for that original sin was for the Jewish people to eat kosher. That means the meat we eat and the vegetables we eat and everything else that we eat must be kosher. That is the original tikkun from that fix-up, from that original sin of Adam HaRishon, says Rav Tzadok HaKohen. So being a vegetarian is not the solution to the problem. Otherwise, the Torah commanded us all, after the Torah was given, to become vegetarians, and it doesn't. It tells us to not mix meat and milk for cruelty reasons, not eat animals that are cruel by nature, not eat their blood or eat their flesh. That is the tikkun. That's before, so the question was, but that was a tikkun. The ideal perhaps was not to eat meat. It was the ideal until we left the ark. And then it became the ideal to not harm animals, not eat the limb of a live animal. And then once we reach Har Sinai, for the Jewish people specifically, says Rashi, like a doctor gives a certain prescription of medications and foods to eat, the Jewish people alone had these medications that they had to eat as well. That's what it says.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, guys, we'll stop over there.
Everybody, thank you so much. We will see you guys next week on the Chazak X-Files. Shavua tov, everybody.
Shalom.